Do you believe that a forgotten and rejected son can change the fate of a nation? It seems unlikely, doesn't it? Yet, this is the story of Ishmael, the firstborn of Abraham, the result of a hasty decision who, despite being set aside, carries a powerful promise. Ishmael's narrative is a surprising account of faith, conflict, and redemption, capable of challenging everything you thought you knew about divine plans and human choices. And what if I told you that even mistakes that seemed irreversible can be transformed by God into a blessing? Yes, even that which went out of your control can be restored, just as God did with Ishmael and his descendants. This isn't just about believing in promises. It's about trusting in the unexpected paths God creates, even when everything seems lost. This story shows that even if society sees you as secondary, God sees you as an essential part of a greater purpose. Prepare yourself for a journey that will deeply touch your soul and transform your perspective on difficult decisions, family conflicts, and divine mercy. By the end of this story, you will be invited to participate in a powerful prayer, a special moment to align your heart with the plan that God has for your life. Are you ready to discover how the deserts of your life can turn into sources of hope? Every great journey begins with a promise, and it was no different with Abraham. Imagine leaving everything behind because a divine voice promised to make you the father of a great nation. Genesis 12:1-3. It sounds inspiring, but like any path, challenges arose. Sarah's barrenness was a clear obstacle, and over time, doubt began to creep in. How many of us, when faced with difficulties, don't question the promises made to us? When the answer doesn't come in our time, we look for shortcuts. Sarah, trying to reconcile faith and reality, suggests that Abraham have a child with her servant, Hagar, Genesis 16:1-3. The emotional weight of this decision is immense. It's like, in the midst of anguish, deciding to resolve with our own hands something we promised to leave to God. This type of situation is common. Have you ever seen someone start a business on a whim because they couldn't wait for the right opportunity? The decision may even work in the short term, but it will have consequences. The choice to involve Hagar in the family story was like opening Pandora's box. The arrival of a child who wasn't exactly expected brought new dynamics to the home. Decisions like this create layers of complexity. Families change, alliances form, and sometimes small conflicts turn into emotional wars. But that's how the great narratives of life are shaped. Abraham and Sarah, as they dealt with this situation, had to keep their trust in the divine promise, even without seeing the immediate outcome. This is where true faith is tested. An example of this is when someone invests in something intangible, like knowledge or patience, without being sure when they'll see the return. The next step in this story shows us how hasty decisions begin to impact the destiny of this family even more, leading to the birth of Ishmael and its implications. Ishmael's birth brought a mix of joy and tension to Abraham's household. Genesis 16:15-16. The initial joy soon turned into fertile ground for rivalries. Hagar, seeing herself pregnant and then a mother, began to look down on Sarah, sparking a silent conflict. This is a reminder of how achievements can become a source of discord. Have you noticed how sometimes one person's victories are seen as another's losses? This troubled atmosphere especially takes root when there is a lack of communication. Abraham, pressured by the growing tension, leaves the solution in Sarah's hands. Genesis 16:6. Delegating the conflict instead of resolving it directly was a risky decision. He found himself cornered, as many of us do in delicate family situations. Perhaps you've witnessed this. A problem that seemed small becomes bigger when no one takes responsibility for facing it. And when emotions build up, the wear and tear is inevitable. Allowing Sarah to handle Hagar revealed a challenging family dynamic. Sarah with her pain from not having children, and Hagar with her temporary sense of superiority, faced off daily. This is how many of the deepest conflicts are born, from unresolved hurts and unchecked pride. In many families, this cycle repeats itself. Have you ever seen someone prefer to hold on to resentment rather than seek reconciliation? Even amidst the chaos, God did not abandon Ishmael. He wasn't the child of the main promise, but he received a unique blessing. Genesis 17:20. This teaches us that even when things don't go as we plan, there is value in every step of the journey. How many times has something unexpected ended up bringing a hidden blessing? In the next part, we'll see how conflict leads Hagar and Ishmael to a journey of escape, paving the way for a transformative experience in the desert. Hagar, weary from the conflicts with Sarah, flees into the desert, carrying her pain and uncertainty with her. This decision reflects how often the human impulse is to escape from unsustainable situations. The desert is a powerful symbol, a place of solitude and trial. Who hasn't wanted to disappear for a while, trying to escape problems? Yet, it is in those moments that the greatest lessons surprisingly emerge. In the midst of this desperate flight, Hagar is found by the angel of the Lord beside a spring of water. Genesis 16:7. The presence of the angel is a crucial divine intervention. God does not ignore those who feel lost and vulnerable, like Hagar. He calls her by name and invites her to reflect on her journey. Where have you come from and where are you going? It's the same question we sometimes need to ask ourselves when we are on the brink of giving up. The name Ishmael, meaning God hears, is born from this profound encounter. Hagar is instructed to return and submit to Sarah, with the promise that her son's descendants will be multiplied. Genesis 16:10-12. It seems contradictory, doesn't it, to return to a place of suffering, but there are times when God calls us to face our fears, knowing that He is in control. Sometimes going back is the only way to find healing. This episode shows how God acts even in life's deserts, offering hope amid pain. It is there, in solitude, that many find their true strength and purpose. Have you ever thought about how the greatest transformations happen precisely during the most difficult periods? It's in crises that we discover what we're made of and realize that we are not alone. Hagar and Ishmael's story in the desert teaches us that no matter how lost we may feel, there is always a greater purpose. And this purpose will lead us to unexpected provision, as we will see in the next part, when God manifests His mercy tangibly for Hagar and her son. Hagar and Ishmael wander aimlessly through the desert, and the lack of supplies soon places them in a desperate situation. Genesis 21:14. When all hope seemed lost, Hagar distances herself from her son, unable to bear watching him die of thirst. This moment of total vulnerability reminds us that even the strongest have their limits. How often do we feel like that, drained, unable to move forward? But it is precisely at this point that divine intervention occurs. The angel of the Lord appears again, reaffirming the promise made about Ishmael. He will become the father of a great nation. Genesis 21:17-18. This promise is not just an immediate comfort, it is a vision of a future that goes beyond the despair of the present. Sometimes we need someone to remind us that there is a greater purpose behind the difficulties we face. Then God opens Hagar's eyes to see a nearby well of water. Genesis 21:19. The solution had always been there, but she couldn't see it until God showed her. This is a great lesson. Often the answers to our crises are already close by, but we need our eyes to be open to see them. This can happen through prayer, reflection, or even an unexpected conversation. This act of provision shows us that God is faithful, even when our choices lead us into the desert. The water in this context is not just a physical solution. It is a symbol of hope and renewal. Just as Hagar and Ishmael were revived by the spring in the desert, we too can find the strength to continue, even when everything seems lost. Their journey does not end here. The divine provision ensures their immediate survival, but it also paves the way for the fulfillment of greater promises. The story now leads us to the crucial moment when Ishmael and Hagar face their greatest rupture with Abraham and Sarah, revealing that, even amid painful goodbyes, God's blessing remains. The birth of Isaac marks a turning point in the story of Abraham and Sarah, but it also intensifies the tensions within the family. Genesis 21:8-10. Sarah, seeing Ishmael playing with Isaac, feels a deep fear for her son's future. The possibility that Ishmael might share the inheritance with Isaac triggers her drastic decision to expel Hagar and Ishmael. This reaction makes us reflect on how fear can lead to impulsive and sometimes painful actions. Abraham faces a wearisome choice. Ishmael was his son, and the bond between them was deep. However, God's instruction comforts him. The line of the covenant will be established with Isaac, but Ishmael will also be blessed with a great nation. Genesis 21:12-13. This dilemma shows that even in the most difficult decisions, there is a greater purpose at play. Sometimes we have to let go of what we love to make room for what God has prepared. The farewell in the desert is one of the saddest moments in Abraham's life. Genesis 21:14. He gives Hagar limited supplies and says goodbye to his son with palpable sorrow. This scene is a reminder that, on many occasions, we are called to trust in God's promises, even when the path seems uncertain. Like Abraham, we often have to take steps of faith without clear guarantees of what will come next. Even though they were expelled, Hagar and Ishmael were not abandoned. The blessing upon Ishmael comes to pass, showing that God cares for everyone, even those outside the main covenant. The promise that he would father 12 princes reinforces that every life has value and purpose. Genesis 17:20. This truth is powerful. God's mercy extends to all, regardless of their context. With this narrative, we learn that God's faithfulness is not dependent on human circumstances. The conclusion of Ishmael's story teaches us that even in the midst of separations, there is redemption and grace. Thus, God's promise to Abraham is fully fulfilled in Isaac, but God's care and provision also extend to Ishmael, ensuring that each person finds their place within God's grand plan. Now that you know this incredible story, the question remains, what will you do with this lesson? Ishmael didn't have control over everything that happened to him, but he found purpose amid chaos and rejection. How many times have you felt that way? As if promises were slow to arrive and difficulties were piling up. The great lesson is that even when everything seems lost, there is hope, and God is working behind the scenes. Are you ready to trust that God can turn your deserts into living waters? Are you willing to place in His hands the situations that seem impossible? Sometimes it's just a matter of opening your heart and seeking a new perspective. It's not about running away from difficulties, but facing them with the certainty that a greater purpose is at play. Now, as a way to connect this story to your own life, I want to invite you to join me in a prayer. Close your eyes and pray with me. Lord, just as you cared for Ishmael in the desert, I ask that you care for me in the areas where I feel lost and rejected. Teach me to trust in your timing, even when the promises seem distant. Open my eyes to see the sources of provision you have already prepared around me, and give me the strength to keep going, just as you did with Hagar and Ishmael. I give you the fears and anxieties that weigh on my heart. Renew in me the confidence that even in the most challenging situations, there is a blessing waiting. Thank you for your faithfulness and mercy. Amen. If this story spoke to your heart, leave a comment and share it with someone who also needs this message. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to continue learning and growing in your faith journey. See you in the next video.